I just started doing green woodworking, and I love it for a lot of reasons, but especially because you get to work outside. I've spent more than enough of my life in gloomy basement shops, and getting outside in the summer is refreshing. It's also practical. When you're working with unseasoned wood, you really don't want to bring it into an air-conditioned house until the piece is done and ready to be in that dry environment. And even before climate control, green woodworkers have mostly worked outside. The chair bodgers of England worked in camps set up right in the woodlands, where they turned tree trunks into chair parts. A lot of American chair makers did even more of the work outside, and a Kentucky chair maker like Chester Cornett did most or even all of his work outdoors. I don't have a forest workspace. I just bang away in my backyard, which is all most of us can do if we're even lucky enough to have a backyard. But when I'm working back there, hoping I'm not annoying the neighbors too much, it's easy to daydream a little bit. Some of the British bodgers spoke beautifully about working in the woods. They said the quiet majesty of the forest made their work pleasant. Could modern woodworkers have some of the same experience? At first, it sounds silly. I mean, we're just romanticizing old-time craftsmen. These old guys worked in the woods because the tree trunks were too heavy to move, so they took their tools to the wood. These days, so many of us live in cities and suburbs. The woodland shop is just unrealistic. For most people, there aren't any woods to work in, and at least not any that are close enough to be practical, no matter how much we daydream. Take me, for example. I live just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, a major city. My neighborhood is a dense suburb with small houses on little plots of land. Sure, there are some great hiking spots once you get outside the city, but right here, where people actually live, it's all streets and houses. No room for woods. I know, I walk my neighborhood a lot. If there was a real woodland around here, I would have already explored it. Except, have I really been looking? I mean, have I walked every street around my house? Or are there some little hidden corners that I haven't seen yet? And when I'm walking, am I paying attention or am I just lost in thought? What if I walked a little further? What if I were actually looking for a workshop tucked away in some forgotten patch of suburbia? Could I suddenly find myself on a stretch of road without any houses? Well, it turns out I can. And I think it's just a drainage ditch or a little strip of woods between streets. But then I look a little deeper, and I realize that I can't see very far from the road. I don't really know what's down there. Everything is so overgrown, you can only see a few feet. There's no way to even know how big this patch of woods is. And then there's a break in the trees. I wouldn't even call it a trail, but it is a way in. And since I'm out here looking for woodlands anyway. So what is in there? Once I get inside the woods, I realize I had no idea what I was looking at from the outside. This is an actual woodland, right in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. I think they just couldn't build houses in here because it was so low and wet. And my first challenge is getting off this high ridge and down into the actual woods. The drop-off here is steep, but I can see a flat patch of woods right below. When I do find a way down, I am in another world. I can't even hear the cars anymore. This is a real piece of forest, and that's amazing, but it doesn't mean I could set up a woodworking shop in here. The creek is the low point, and the ground on either side is steep and uneven. I have to climb back out of this gully and try to find some flat terrain where things are a little drier. I try to just keep going in a straight line, but I don't get very far. So right over here, I've come to the west end of the woods. The whole thing runs west to east this way. I came in sort of at the middle and went in this direction, and what I've hit here is just wetlands. It's just swamp. And then where I'm standing right now is good dry land, but the river I just crossed, the creek that I just crossed, well, that's just over there to the south a little bit, and we get flash flooding and really heavy rains down here. It's obvious just from looking around that the creek floods and it comes up over right where I'm standing. So I could never set a shop up over here. I need to go further east, and I need to find some place with higher ground it's going to stay dry all summer. The only problem with pushing east was the lack of anything resembling a trail. The ground here had thick undergrowth and big patches of dense brush that I had to go around. I found myself crossing and recrossing the creek as it wound its way back and forth across the lowlands. Of course, it's good to have a water source near any woodland shop. Even if you can't drink the water, it has lots of uses, and there are some good trees like sycamore that only grow in wet conditions. Then again, try to imagine me carrying a heavy log across these mossy rocks. Some of the crossings are easier, but the creek is deep in some spots, and any path to a good shop would need to avoid the water. So that's another thing to think about. And I haven't even talked about trees yet. As I'm walking through the woods, I'm not just looking for a good site to set up my shop. I also have to pay a lot of attention to the trees. I mean, that's the whole reason you set up in the woods, is you want to be able to fell a tree and work on it right there without moving it. So the species of tree, how much water they're getting, and where they're located makes a really big difference. As I'm walking around, of course, I'm looking up and just checking out the canopy. And I can see the shapes of the leaves. I can see a lot of red oak, probably some white oak, also hickory, cherry, and sycamore. Trees like sycamore aren't really good. They're not great chair-making trees, but you can make things out of them like kitchen utensils, spoons, spatulas, stuff like that. So they're useful. And then I look down a lot too, and look at the saplings that are coming up. Here's a maple. Maple's another one of those woods that's really great for carving projects and spoons. There's tons of oak leaves, mostly from last year, and lots of acorns. So I'm paying attention for those too. The other thing I'm going to look for a lot is hickory nuts, because one of the best trees you can have for chair making is hickory. It's very easy to carve when it's green, but it's extraordinarily strong and hard when it dries. So if a woodland like this has oak and ash or hickory, well, those are perfect. And then if there are some softer species like beech and wild cherry, well, those are great for turning. And so far, I've seen some examples of all of those trees. So just looking at the trees, it's fantastic. Now, down where I am here, where it's kind of wet, the trees are on a nice flat area, which is also super important because a tree that grows on a hillside is going to be filled with tension. And as it dries, it's going to either curl or it could even split and break apart. So you need straight trees that were grown on flat ground. And that's what we've got here. It's a good environment that lets trees grow to an old age. This one here, this is tough to believe, this oak tree is still alive. It has this enormous split. It's filled with bugs. The center is completely rotten, but the top of the tree has a beautiful crown of foliage. This has probably been here for 75 years, and who knows how long it's going to keep going. Oak is a survivor. After a while, the ground to the east starts to open up, and I can move a lot more quickly. I'm kind of stunned at how big this woodland is. I've been in here for a couple of hours, and I haven't walked the whole thing yet. Luckily, as I get further from the creek, the land gets drier and more hilly. Eventually, I see a rise with flat land on top, and for the first time today, I think I might have actually found a good space. Maybe the best thing about walking around in the woods is sometimes you find something like this. You find a kid's fort, and seeing this it just takes me back to being a kid. This is what I spent my childhood doing. I mean, reading and out in the woods, building forts and acting out The Hobbit. So I love feeling like, even now, kids are still doing that. And this is kind of a bad sign because it says, well, there's people around here, but I can tell no one's been here in a couple of years. It's obvious. There's a few forts right around here, so obviously there were neighborhood kids that came out here, and they must have spent days, they must have spent whole summers out here building these forts and playing whatever amazing imaginary games, but not for years. You can tell nobody's been out here, not this year, not last year. Kids who built these grew up, and they're gone now. The fact that these are here suggests that this is actually a pretty good place to work. It's a little bit up from the river, and it doesn't look like it floods here. And somebody could make a structure and it's still here a couple years later. The problem that I have is that the road is right over there. I've come all the way to this end of the woods, and I wouldn't be comfortable leaving tools over here. I would be afraid they'd get stolen or vandalized. I'm not too close to home. So I need a place that's like this, but more secluded. I've walked a lot of this woods right now. There's just kind of a northwest corner I haven't looked at yet. And I've really got to hope that over there, there's some sort of high ground that's dry and still has good timber. I'm running out of daylight and I'm running out of woods. The last time across the woods is the quickest. I'm getting to know where the clear ground is, and there are a few spots where crossing the creek is especially easy. My last piece of unexplored ground is up a steep hill, and I admit, I'm starting to get tired. I hope there's something good up at the top. This is a pretty big piece of woods, but most of it is no good for a workshop. Of course, when I get to the top of the hill, what do I find but another fort? They're all over here. And it makes sense because everything around here is houses. We're still in the city, really. This is just a little pocket of woods. It's totally surrounded by streets and neighborhoods. But this corner right here that I just found, I could set up a shop here. The ground here is flat and it's dry. The creek is down here to my left and I'm a good 20, 30 feet above it. So there's no way it's gonna flood up here. And you can tell that it's dry because kids have been playing up here for God knows how many years. It's a good spot. And then there's plenty of timber. I see oak, beech, wild cherry. There's a little bit of hickory, mostly saplings, but that's okay. And there's some sycamore and some maple that I could use for carving. So really, everything that you would want to have is right here. If I wanted to set up a chair making shop, a woodland shop, I could put it right here, plant my shave horse and my bench down right here, start draw knifing parts and not stop until the snow started to fall. I admit, that's exactly what I would like to do. Of course, I probably can't do that. This is a good piece of woodland, and the timber is especially good, but I am living in a city. I can't leave valuable tools or even homemade benches out here in the woods. Someone would steal them or break them just for fun. On top of that, these woods aren't private property, but they're either protected wetlands or the city owns them. Either way, setting up a shop here is just going to get me in trouble with the police. And I knew this going in. I always knew I couldn't actually set up a shop in these woods. What I wanted to do in this video is just give you a sense of some of the things you might want to look for, like dry, level ground, good timber, and easy access. But I haven't covered everything. You have to think about sanitation, shelter when it rains, and some secure storage for tools. A woodland shop sounds simple, but it's not. More than anything, you need to find a good patch of woods, and that takes creativity. Some chair makers rent a little spot from a farmer, and I'm sure some people do it guerrilla style. You can always find a secluded spot, set up your tools, and just cross your fingers. But I can't say I recommend that. Beyond being creative, you also just need to be observant. I've lived in my neighborhood for 5 years, and I honestly didn't know this patch of woods was here until a few weeks ago when I started thinking about woodland workshops. I really did dismiss my neighborhood as a place for urban green woodworking. But I was wrong. There's a big and very beautiful piece of forest within walking distance of my house. If the situation were just a little different, I could probably set up a workspace right in these woods. The point is, I didn't know it was here because I wasn't really looking. Wherever you are, go out in your neighborhood and try to see the whole thing with fresh eyes. Maybe you can have an outdoor shop if you keep your mind open. So this video was a little bit of an experiment for me. Getting out of the shop and not even doing any actual woodworking, just taking an idea and sort of working through it and doing things at a little bit slower pace. If you like this sort of thing and you'd like to see more of it, go ahead and leave me a comment. And these videos are only possible because of my patrons on Patreon. They are an incredible community of craftspeople that give me a lot of useful feedback, and they also provide the financial support that makes this channel possible, and makes this channel possible without sponsorships or advertisers or free tools or any of the things I don't want to get into. If you'd like to be a part of an amazing community and keep this channel independent, go on over to patreon.com/RexKrueger and check out all the rewards I have for the people who make this content possible. I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for watching.